Story 1. He ended things out of the blue. He had previously said he wanted to marry me. We had started planning a life together. I had never been happier in my life with someone. I never felt so sure about something. It devastated me. I had felt in my bones he was it. I haven't felt that way about anyone since. It's been 10 years. Took a while to process. If I'm honest, years. I don't miss him or love him anymore. I just wish I could have what he took from me. Story 2. Herpes scare where he treated me like I had the plague until my test results came back. Would not even sit near me or touch anything I had touched, cooked, etc. I tested negative twice. He then tested and was positive and thought nothing of it. Wanted to resume unprotected sex, kiss, engage in touch, etc. In other words, he treated me exactly opposite of how he did when he thought I might be positive. Story 3. She left her hard drive plugged into my computer. She had been insisting that I had been cheating for months, and I suspected she was projecting, so I looked. She was having relations with guys for money in my bed. I had to call her dad to come get her. She would not leave my house. She got mad after I broke up with her because she caught a sexually transmitted disease and I didn't, so she put stuff in my gas tank. Just awful all around. Story 4. He died. Waking up in the middle of the night and seeing he was very unwell. Calling for an ambulance while fruitlessly trying to wake him. Seeing paramedics start cardiopulmonary resuscitation and knowing that life will not be the same. Having to ring his family and explain what had happened. Making the decision to remove life support. It was all unimaginably awful. Story 5. My ex took drugs at a rave. I only got drunk. We went to a city 4 hours away to the rave with the crew. He became violent and erratic. It was bizarre. Anyways, I drove him home the entire time he was saying voices were telling him to hurt me and rape me, etc. the whole way back home. I drove him to his grandpa's house, and then he chased me and announced he was going to beat me. I called his parents and my mom crying. My mom came and the neighbors called the police. About 8 police cars came, and an ambulance tackled him and took him to a mental ward. They diagnosed him with type 2 bipolar mood disorder. I was on the phone with my friends I went with, begging them to tell me if he was on drugs. They cracked and said he took ecstasy. I told his parents and the hospital/paramedics. His very religious parents blamed me for putting drugs into their boy. Mind you, he was 25 and a 220-pound beast, and I was 22 and 120 pounds. I told him what happened because he didn't remember. He wanted to get back together, but he never corrected his parents. He was excited to invite me to a family wedding as long as I apologized to his parents for what I did, specifically his mom. I was so done. I broke up with him on the spot. I know it sounds so evil to admit I relished in his ugly crying and his whys of confusion. This was 2 years after the event, and after dealing with his parents constantly berating me, I was so done with his excuses for his parents saying I was the devil. Story 6. Got cheated on. She let me know by sharing videos they made in my apartment on my bed. And the entire time, it was them saying how I'm a loser and won't ever find true love. Story 7. My wife left me for a good friend of ours. This good friend was very charismatic but also pretty terrible. He bragged about his past exploits and felt the most pride when it included breaking up a couple only to dump the girl. We were both horrified by these stories, yet somehow it did not dissuade my wife, and we became the next couple he broke up. That was the worst, and I have not been the same since. Story 8. I was supposed to fly back from a trip on my birthday. She stayed an extra night and came home, having cheated on me. We lived together, so I stayed in another bedroom while I could hear her on the phone with the guy she cheated with, who lived across the country. The calls were frequent and lasted a while. I drank too much and eventually moved out when an opportunity presented itself. We had been together for about 4 years at that time. Story 9. My ex knowingly brought bedbugs into my apartment and lied to me about it. He did a ton of other horrible abusive things, but the bedbugs cost me thousands of dollars and multiple rounds of fumigating, living with my clothes in trash bags, and without a mattress for months. Story 10. The worst thing for me was realizing that I had been giving everything, only to find out they were not even trying. It's painful when you put in so much effort, but the other person is just emotionally checked out. Story 11. The worst thing? Getting ghosted after thinking everything was going great. One day, you're texting and making plans, and then suddenly radio silence. No explanation, no closure. It's like you didn't even exist. The whole thing just messes with your head and makes you question everything. That was rough. Story 12. Partner's mother passes away from cancer, and they are such a mess that I handle all the funeral arrangements. She claims emotional meltdown as justification to sleep around with random people. Refuses therapy but accuses me of stealing her inheritance. Mom was flat broke. When I protest, she invites an army deserter addict into our home and throws me out on the street after spending all the money on opiates. I had a nervous breakdown after that and was homeless for 18 months afterwards. Story 13. Partner cheated on me with a really good friend at the time. Doubting myself ever since, so I choose to be single now due to major trust issues. I know not everyone will cheat, but I can't get too close to anyone because of the psychological damage that person's actions left on me. Story 14. That would be when my then-wife decided one day to pack up a suitcase and move 12 hours away. At the time, we had a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old. I was left to deal with the abandonment issues and heartache that the kids obviously had after that. At least she did not try to take the kids with her. Story 15. Went to a dispensary, and they only took cash. They were about to close, and the ATM was down the street. My boyfriend offered the dispensary owner to keep me locked in their establishment as collateral so he could run down the street to the ATM. He never came back. I smoked a blunt with the owner and called an Uber home. We never spoke again. Story 16. I was physically abused. He gave me a concussion multiple times and called the police on me and had me arrested just because I scratched up his face while trying to defend myself. Meanwhile, my entire body was covered in bruises. It took me way too long to finally escape his madness due to him constantly threatening me and my family. I filed a restraining order and ran. Now I can smell a red flag from miles away. Story 17. Ex spread a rumor I was trying to get with her 14-year-old daughter. Ex had tried to harm herself when we broke up, and a week or so later, her daughter tried to call me at 3 in the morning. I woke up that morning and texted her, "What's up, Ma? Are you okay?" The mom took that as some inappropriate behavior and spread the rumor. She has since apologized for that, but I left her unread. I'll forgive her when I die. Story 18. She had a psychotic episode. During it, she left me for her physical therapist and told everyone she knew that I am a narcissist and that she found out I was planning to kill her and her family. All was her psychosis. It was a very painful time. Story 19. Unbeknownst to me, the girl I was dating had links to organized crime in our city. She used to supplement her income with cocaine dealing and organizing escorts for guys. We had a big argument over the phone. She got drunk and fell down the stairs in her house. She called up her friends and told them I'd pushed her, so they came over to confront me. Fortunately or unfortunately, they got the wrong house and attacked my neighbors. The police were called and multiple arrests were made. The police later raided my girlfriend's house. Large quantities of drugs were found, and she ended up doing time. In 2013, she crashed her car while out of her mind on alcohol and cocaine and was pronounced dead at the scene. Story 20. He left his MySpace open on my laptop, and I snooped. He had been selling himself on Craigslist for gay, unprotected sex. He was also an insane Nazi supporter and had an entire secret profile dedicated to Hitler, posting horrible videos depicting deaths of certain minority groups and other hate crimes. I was 16 and he had gotten me pregnant, which I thought was a burst condom, but he posted that he poked holes in all his condoms to impregnate me on purpose. I had a miscarriage at 10 weeks due to the stress of finding all of this out at once. I immediately dumped him, got myself tested, and couldn't believe it, but I was clean. He got my name tattooed on him after we broke up in an attempt to win me back. When that didn't work, he robbed a Radio Shack where he worked for money to buy me an engagement ring. He went to jail and, from my latest snooping, appears to have gotten his life together. I wish him the best, but what a rough time that was. Story 21. My husband wanted a Ford Mustang but didn't have good credit, so I had to co-sign for the loan. For days later, he asked me for a divorce. It turns out he wanted to drive his 19-year-old girlfriend around in a new Mustang instead of our older Toyota Corolla. Story 22. My ex said she felt bad for a guy who liked her, but she was dating me, so she gave him oral sex in a stairwell. She told me almost immediately out of guilt, but it's not like telling me that changes what happened. I also had an ex who kept telling me stories about her former husband. She was pretty sure he and his friend had killed someone, but never knew for sure. She also mentioned he was a drug addict with lots of weapons and some of the worst anger issues she had ever seen. About a week or two into us officially dating, she suddenly disappeared, stopped texting, and wouldn't answer calls. It turned out her former husband needed a ride to get to rehab, and she wanted to help him out. But she said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to get back together with him." Well, you'll never guess what happened next. She got back with him. Story 23. My ex-husband flew his ex and their child to our home in California to have a sexy staycation while I was helping my sister through brain surgery in Ohio. Story 24. I was with my ex-girlfriend for 3 years in my late 20s. We had just returned from a wonderful week-long vacation, and in hindsight, she hid her feelings extremely well. 2 days later, she broke up with me out of the blue, saying she needed to find herself and her individuality. A few days later, I found out she had been cheating on me with a very close friend of mine. After that, I never spoke to either of them again. Story 25. My ex used to be in love with this girl he barely knew years before he was with me. He took her rejection hard, but I never knew the full extent of it until years later. A couple of years ago, days before my 30th birthday, he ran into her randomly. He then proceeded to text his friend things about how he's not over her, how good she looked, he's not attracted to me anymore, he feels trapped in the relationship and wants to try things with her again, etc., and text her as well. Meanwhile, it was completely one-sided, and she hasn't even thought about him in years. Shortly after this happened, I found a letter in our home that he wrote years ago, right after they broke up, that was written to her that he never got rid of. It wasn't a nice letter about how much he loved her, no. It was an angry, graphically violent, hate-filled letter about how she's nothing more than a worthless woman who deserves to die, and all the ways in which he wanted to brutally murder her. I couldn't believe that this was the person I had been living with for the last 2 years. He tried to downplay it like it was no big deal and was from a long time ago, and he begged me not to tell her or anyone, which I stupidly listened to until a year later when I saw he was still following her on Instagram after I threatened to tell her if he even so much as looked in her direction ever again. We met up for coffee, and I told her everything, exposing his secret, where she thanked me and proceeded to immediately block him on everything. It was an extremely healing moment for me. Story 26. She cheated. I fell into depression. She filed for divorce, claiming that I couldn't be a parent to our children because of depression. Curiously, in her opinion, I was somehow healthy enough to work a ton of overtime, though. This all means that she cheated, I don't get to see my kids that much, and I give her a lot of money each month as punishment. Story 27. I was 18 years old and was not on speaking terms with my family. I moved in with my boyfriend, and a month later, there was a knock at the door. It was a young woman asking for my boyfriend. I made myself scarce and went into the kitchen, trying not to be jealous. She yelled, "Do you know I'm pregnant by him?" Punch to the gut. I still went on to marry and have a child with him before realizing what an awful situation I had gotten myself into. Seriously, parents who abandon their kids at 18 are terrible. Left to my own devices, I had no trusted confidant or friends to give me sound advice. I would not wish circumstances like that on anyone. Story 28. Abuse. He was very violent and sexually assaulted me. He belittled me and isolated me from my family and friends. The cherry on top was when I finally had proof he cheated and broke up with him. He then showed up on my doorstep, refusing to leave, and proceeded to pin me to my bed and headbutt me in the face, breaking my nose. It was the most horrific 2 years of my life. Story 29. I was sitting in our bedroom where our computer desk was, spending part of my Saturday browsing the internet. I heard her come into the apartment with a friend and didn't think of it until I heard them start having sex. Story 30. I met my now ex-wife in 2018. and we married in 2022, the high point of a loving, fun, happy relationship. In 2023, she had a burst of success in her career as a stage actor, got a huge ego, and decided she could have whatever she wanted. So, she started dating a female colleague of ours while we were, by her own admission, still happily married, fell in love, and decided she didn't want to be married to a man anymore. I went from happily kissing my wife every morning to realizing I needed to move out within a matter of days. This was difficult, of course, but I'm not even getting started. Because this all went down while we were rehearsing for a stage show we were starring in opposite each other. By the time the show opened, it was clear our marriage was over. Every night, twice a night on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, I had to go through a scene where her character aggressively berates me, often with the audience joining in, then she forgives me and we get married on stage. I did this 22 times while I knew my marriage was over. She was absolutely horrible about respecting boundaries during this period, and not only did she bring her girlfriend to the show multiple times, but they also parked at a table right outside the dressing room. So, the only way for me to get backstage was to walk by them or go straight through the audience. I was having uncontrollable crying fits and panic attacks between acts, and a couple of people even asked if I was abusive or cheating because they couldn't believe someone could be so vindictive. But she wasn't being vindictive. She's just a narcissist, and I was too shocked and traumatized to stick up for myself. On the last night of the show, I was freaking out and wishing I could just pilot my body like a mechanical suit and just stop feeling anything. And then it actually happened. My body was going to the right places. My voice was singing the right notes. But the world was so quiet I could hear my heartbeat. It was honestly amazing. Like my entire nervous system was finally giving me a break from being tortured for 2 weeks. I told my therapist about this, calling it my first flow state as a performer. She identified it as a dissociative episode, a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. Then it happened a couple more times at different gigs, and it was way less amazing. The whole thing was by far the worst experience of my life, and it just kept going for 2.5 weeks. Until the show closed and I had to dive full steam into separating my life from the woman I was sure I'd grow old with. I hear she's been leaning hard into portraying herself as a lesbian by getting a hideous buzz cut, which has messed up her casting prospects. She also managed to get fired from her job for being a generally awful narcissistic person.